With the Rangers up against the salary cap, will Barclay Goodrow be traded or perhaps even be bought out? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 858 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And so I want to spend pretty much the entire episode here talking about Barclay Goodrow and his future with the New York Rangers and why it's murky at best. And it's really through no fault of his own or anything along those lines. I think for the most part, Barclay Goodrow has pretty much delivered what you would expect from a player of his caliber, of his ilk, for the 2 seasons that he's been here. But it's a very simple situation. The Rangers, as we've discussed on here quite a bit, are up against it when it comes to the salary cap situation. They have a whole roster to fill out, and they're going to have to probably find a way to create some cap space in one way or another. And one of the ways to do that is to, unfortunately, move on from Barclay Goodrow. I think a trade is something that's probably the most likely and probably the option that makes the most sense if you are the New York Rangers. I suppose a buyout is also on the table, although a little bit later in today's episode, I will discuss the buyout and specifically why I don't think it's the way for the Rangers to go and why I think the trade is the better option. But we'll get to that in due time. The idea of the Rangers moving on from Barclay Goodrow at all is not something that I have celebrated or will celebrate. It's one of those things that kind of feels inevitable. It kind of feels like there's no other way to go here. But again, it's a situation where Barclay Goodrow, I think for the most part, has delivered and has been the player that the Rangers thought they were getting when they traded for him 2 seasons ago. And obviously, he's been part of a lot of winning with this team. And of course, the really deep playoff run 2 years ago. So, if there's a way to keep him around, if you guys have any ideas, I'm all ears. But again, the way things stand right now, the inevitability of the situation does seem to be, a split between Barclay Goodrow and the New York Rangers in the not too distant future here, for sure. You go on Cap Friendly. That's a website that I think a lot of hockey fans are becoming familiar with. You can look at the contract situations for the Rangers or any team and what it's going to look like a couple of years down the road, how much cap space they have, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look at the Rangers, they have all the forwards listed, all the defensemen listed, the goalies, you've even got minor league players on there. But you look at it and it's like, okay, how do we free up a little bit of cap space? How do we give ourselves at least a little bit of flexibility? How do we get enough money to give new contracts to Keandre Miller and Alexis Lafreniere, while also maybe opening the door to sign, at least a couple of very low-cost free agents when free agency begins. And the contract, and I've said this before, the one that really stands out for me is Barclay Goodrow. And it's because he's making $3.64 million, and he's doing this as somebody who is mostly a fourth-line player. If you go on Cap Friendly, and I do want to address something that, a couple of different Ranger fans have thrown out there as an idea, because every now and then you go on Twitter or even the comment section of Locked On New York Rangers, any episode, anytime I talk about the salary cap situation, there's always at least a couple of people that throw out the idea of, well, don't worry about trading somebody like Goodrow. He's not making that much money anyway. You got to trade somebody like, a Panarin or a Trouba or whoever it might be. One of the big time superstar players that's making a lot of money and who by trading them, you would open up a lot of cap space. And it's a nice idea in theory. I mean, I'm not jumping out of my shoes to trade Mika Zibanejad or an Artemi Panarin. I know there's some Ranger fans that wouldn't mind doing one of those things. But the real obstacle here is the fact that all those players, all the usual suspects, all the guys making big-time bucks on the New York Rangers, they all have no move clauses, or basically pretty much every single one of them does. With Panarin, he's got a no-move clause. Mika's got a full no move. So does Kreider. So does Trocheck. So does Jacob Trouba. The only big-time star players on this Ranger team without a no-move clause are Adam Fox and Igor Shesterkin. And they're both obviously making a lot of money, but I don't think there are too many Ranger fans out there who are going to be lining up to trade one or both of those players. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Adam Fox, one of the elite NHL defenseman in this league and still very young. And Igor Shesterkin, I mean, for what he's done, they've got him at an absolute steal. Igor Shesterkin, $5.66 million per season. And you're talking about somebody who, you can make the case best goalie in hockey. He's not going to win the Vezina this year or anything like that. But he's up there. He's certainly up there, and I think will be for years to come. So again, it kind of comes back to, okay, what do you do here? If you're the Rangers, because your options are limited. Your options are limited due to everything that I just said there. And if you want to look at other guys who are making a decent amount of money, but maybe not a great amount, you've got Barclay Goodrow, who obviously we're talking about in today's episode, $3.64 million per season. You've got Capo Caco, who's at $2.1 million per season. And you've got Ryan Lindgren, who is at $3 million per season. And I don't think, of those three, I mean, I guess you could make a case for one of the other two if you want to. If you're somebody that just is done with Capo Caco, you don't think he's going to be the player that the Rangers thought that they were drafting. Or if it's a situation where maybe you like Ryan Lindgren, but you feel like he's somebody that could be replaced, you can make the case for one of those players. But to me, the guy that makes the most sense, the guy who doesn't really have a ton of upside, and I say this as a big fan of Barclay Goodrow, but I feel like with Barclay Goodrow, what you see is what you get. And what you get is a very solid all-around player, but it's not somebody who's like ticketed for superstardom in this league. Whereas, Ryan Lindgren's still very young, still, very, very important part of the Ranger blue line. Obviously, he'll throw his weight around, play physical hockey, and a player that I have referred to as the heart and soul of the New York Rangers. And with Capo Caco, I mean, yeah, it's been 4 years, but I don't know that you want to give up on somebody who I believe is just 22 years old right now, drafted second overall, very, very highly thought of. And look, he has improved as the seasons have gone on here. I realize that he's not where we all thought he would be at this point, but he's getting better year by year. And hopefully Laviolette and his new coaching staff can get the most out of Capo Caco. And with Barclay Goodrow, again, rock solid player. I think Laviolette would really like a player like Goodrow, but the cold, hard reality of the situation here, the Rangers salary cap situation, is that they probably just can't afford to trade him. They got to move somebody, and I just feel like he's the most logical candidate for all those reasons that I just laid out a second ago there. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second here. I want to break down Barclay Goodrow's stats with the New York Rangers. I mean, you could argue that he's played the best 2 seasons of his career while a member of the New York Rangers. We'll dive into that in a second. We'll just talk about what he brings to the table. And then eventually, I'm going to look at all the Ranger options, what they could expect to get back from Barclay Goodrow if they are able to trade him, or if a buyout could be something that is on the table as well. And we're going to get to all that good stuff in just a second here. But first, we must let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun that you are about to have. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you will always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, we just want to thank everybody, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, busy week in front of us here. You're definitely going to want to stick around. We've got the NHL draft happening on Wednesday night, the first round, and then the rest of the draft on Thursday. We're going to be all over that, talking about everything the Rangers do. And, maybe they should have picked this guy, or I really like this guy. And maybe this guy could have fallen to the Rangers if he dropped another couple of picks, whatever the case might be. Maybe the Rangers trade up in the draft, trade down in the draft. We'll see how that all shakes out. Maybe Barclay Goodrow is traded on draft day. You never know for sure. But whatever does happen, we're going to break it all down from every possible angle here on Locked On New York Rangers. And, of course, we got free agency in front of us as well. But for right now, let's go ahead, keep the focus on Barclay Goodrow. And, again, the idea of him not being on the Rangers anymore, that doesn't make me happy. Quite the opposite. In fact, it kind of bums me out. I'm probably not the only Ranger fan that feels that way. But again, you're paying $3.64 million per season to a guy who mostly plays on the fourth line. He can play some third line or even some top six. We've seen the Rangers move him all over the place. Gives you some position versatility as well. But again, it's just the cold, hard nature of the business and of this situation. When the Rangers gave him $3.64 million per year, they weren't anywhere near the salary cap limit. And now they are, because they've extended a bunch of their own guys, brought in a couple other free agents. Vincent Trocheck certainly springs to mind. So they're in a much, much different situation than they were 2 off seasons ago, namely because of the salary cap and the amount of money that they're giving out to some of their top players, some of their star players. But as far as Barclay Goodrow, what he brings to the Rangers, I feel like we might as well just go ahead, run through his stats, a quick refresher for everything he's done for this team since he's been here. And then I'll just kind of talk about who he is as a player. I mean, some of you guys know, but I still want to go over it. And, we'll look ahead to the future here and see if the Rangers might end up trading him or buying him out or whatever the case might be. But as far as his 2 years for the Rangers, his age 28 and age 29 season, he just turned 30. But 2 seasons with the Rangers, 161 games out of a possible 164. So very durable. He's out there every night. He has scored 24 goals, 40 assists, so 64 points in the 161 games. He is also a plus 16 during his time with the New York Rangers. He has averaged 15 minutes and 25 seconds of ice time per night, which is actually more than he averaged in his 2 seasons with Tampa or his 6 seasons with the Sharks. So Barclay Goodrow, somebody whose role has expanded pretty much throughout his NHL career. With the Sharks, he was at 12-12 a night. With the Lightning, 14-47, and now the Rangers 15-25. And I would say he's earned every little bit of that. At times, with the Rangers, part of the reason for that is he ends up being in a top 6 role, and he's a little bit miscast in the top 6. I think you can get by with him there, for a couple of games here and there. But for the most part, in an ideal world, I think Goodrow should probably be a bottom 6 type forward. As far as faceoffs for, his 2 seasons with the Rangers, 47.8 winning percentage. He's actually regressed in that area from his other 2 stops in the NHL. Blocked 118 shots, has dished out 252 hits, and 69 takeaways against 70 giveaways. And the stats are one thing, but Barclay Goodrow, one of those guys that brings a lot of intangibles. Very accountable player, somebody who we use this. I think the first player I said it about was back in the day with Jesper Fast, and plays every shift like it's his last. You're going to get an honest effort from Barclay Goodrow. He's not a superstar. He's not somebody that's going to lay up the score sheet every single night, but he's going to go out there and do his damnedest to win his shift and, obviously make a positive impact toward the Rangers winning the game. And he's somebody, I mentioned a second ago how, he bounces up and down and all over the lineup, somebody that will do that about as happily as any player in the NHL will do that. He really does seem to be a very selfless, very team first type of player, willing to do the dirty work and sacrifice his body and do whatever it takes to help the Rangers win games or whichever team he happens to be playing for at the moment. Also a former 2-time Stanley Cup champion. And, you don't think of Goodrow as being like this grizzled veteran, but he kind of is getting into that territory. He hit the big 3-0, 30 years old. So one of the elder statesmen on the New York Rangers. And, a moment, this one's kind of fresh in my head because it happened in the playoffs against the Devils, but a moment that I think of when I think of Barclay Goodrow is the fight that he got into in Game 5 against the Devils. But Rangers were basically being run out of the building by the Devils. The series was tied 2-2. The Devils won Game 5 going away. I think it was like 4-0 or whatever it was. I'm pretty sure the Rangers were shut out. But Goodrow gets into a fight against somebody bigger than him, and, he's doing the best he can. And the fight was pretty much a draw. But after it was over, Goodrow was basically yelling at his bench, like, wake up, let's get it going. And again, as I'm saying all these things, I'm describing Goodrow and who he is as a player and who he is as a person. The thought that I have here, and it's a thought that a lot of you probably have as well, is that Goodrow is the type of player that the Rangers need more of, not less of. And for that reason, it really is a bummer to me that they're going to have to probably end up parting ways with Barclay Goodrow. Again, unless they do something completely unforeseen, unless one of the star players is, and we don't know about this, he's looking for the door, and there's a star player who not only would be willing to waive his no-move clause, but is even excited to do so. And I don't think that applies to any of these Ranger players because I think they all like being Rangers. I think they all like being here. I think they all like playing together. So unless that's the case, unless you move one of those big time contracts and somebody waives their no move clause, then again, I just don't see any other outcome here other than Barclay Goodrow being an ex-Ranger for this upcoming season here. So, again, you think about Goodrow. This is something else I want to talk about. You do think about, the toughness, the physicality, the penalty killing, playing in all 3 zones, defensively responsible forward. You guys know the kind of player that Barclay Goodrow is. But even from a scoring standpoint, he has picked it up in that area as well. The Rangers went with an interesting first line for a very brief time last year. All my favorite line combinations, they always get rid of them really fast, even if they're working. But last year, from left to right, the top line, at least for a short spell, was Panarin, Mika, and Goodrow. And at first, you're thinking like, man, you're going to put your two best players and have Goodrow out there, but it actually kind of worked. Barclay Goodrow went out there and did some of the dirty work, won some board battles, went to the dirty parts of the rink, and there's been times where certain players have maybe slowed down some of the Ranger skill players. When Dryden Hunt was on the second line with Panarin and Strome, I just didn't think that worked. Nothing against Dryden Hunt. But with Barclay Goodrow, I never felt for a second that like he's a detriment to them or he's slowing them down. He can finish the opportunities that they set him up with. He can make some good passes himself. And most notably, he can do the dirty work. He can win those board battles and keep offensive zone possessions alive. And I thought Panarin and Mika really benefited from that. I was about to say I'd be curious if they go back to it this upcoming season, but again, I don't think Barclay Goodrow is going to be here this upcoming season. But we'll see. Never say never. There could be some out of left field move or some way for the Rangers to squeeze him in under the cap. We shall see. But Goodrow, again, not a superstar player, but he does give you a little bit of everything. I don't want to see him traded, but due to the cap situation, it feels like that's going to be the resolution to what happens here with Barclay Goodrow and the New York Rangers. In just a second, we're going to discuss what the Rangers could look to get in return for Barclay Goodrow in a trade, and if the buyout option is something that could be on the table between the Rangers and Barclay Goodrow. And we're going to get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, let's go ahead, keep everything rolling here. So, again, if the Rangers are going to move Barclay Goodrow, I do think it will be via a trade. It might be a trade that the Rangers don't really get a whole lot in return for because it might be something of a glorified salary dump. But we'll get to that in just a second. For now, I want to talk about the possibility of the Rangers potentially buying out Barclay Goodrow, and more specifically, why I don't think that's necessary and why I don't think it's the road that the Rangers are going to go down here. So there's a lot to this. As far as what a buyout of Goodrow would look like, if they do buy out Barclay Goodrow this offseason, here's what would happen as far as cap space is concerned. They would gain an additional $3.8 million in cap space this season. They would gain $3.7 million in cap space next season and $2.491 million the season after that. And that sounds nice at first glance, but again, you got to remember if they trade him, then they've essentially gotten themselves $3.64 million in cap space for all the next 4 seasons going forward. So ultimately, you're going to save more cap space if you trade him rather than buying him out. You'll get a little bit more money, $3.8 million instead of $3.64 million for this upcoming season, and then $3.7 million the next season. But we're talking about peanuts here, and in the long run, you're going to want to trade him rather than buying him out because on top of everything I just said, if the Rangers do buy out Goodrow, yes, they save money the next 3 seasons, but they will be losing money against the salary cap in the 4 seasons, or 5 seasons actually, that follow after that. The first of those seasons, it would cost the Rangers $8,000 against the salary cap. And we'll basically call that a wash. That's not really a whole lot. But the 4 seasons after that one, it would cost the Rangers $1.258 million in cap space per season for a player that is no longer on your team. And that's not ideal. And it's possible that, in the time between now and those seasons where Goodrow, after being bought out, would count against the salary cap, it's possible the salary cap itself rises and maybe, $1.258 million really isn't that much by then. But I don't know that you can bank on that. I mean, you would think that that's probably what would happen, but you never know with the NHL and the salary cap situation and everything. So to me, the far better option here, rather than, buying him out and getting just a little bit of extra money for these next 2 seasons, I think the far better option is to trade him. Now, of course, trading Barclay Goodrow does present some challenges for the Rangers. For starters, we've been talking about his salary, $3.64 million per season. I do think that's a little bit steep for Barclay Goodrow. And again, I say this as a big Barclay Goodrow fan and somebody that, hey, you know what? He got his money, good for him. But I just don't think there's too many fourth liners in this league that are making $3.64 million. And that's where Barclay Goodrow usually plays. And even if you see him as, say, like a third liner, $3.64 million, that's a little steep even for the third line. I don't know how many bottom 6 forwards in this league are getting that much money, $3.64 million from whatever team that they happen to play for. With that said, that price I don't think is a gross overpayment for all the reasons that I just mentioned. He's been a very solid player for this Ranger team, and I'm sure he would play a valuable role and do some good things for his new team, whatever team he ends up getting traded for. But, again, it's an overpayment, but not a gross overpayment. I think that's the best way to say it as far as his $3.64 million price tag. The other challenge, in addition to the salary cap hit for whichever team was to trade for Barclay Goodrow in this hypothetical here, is that Barclay Goodrow is still signed for another 4 seasons. So, when Goodrow, when he came to the Rangers, got a 6-year deal with the team, he will only be 34 years old when his contract runs up. So it's not like he's ancient, or it's not like he's going to be ancient or anything like that. But you got to remember, Barclay Goodrow plays a very physical, very grinding, very just demanding, physically demanding style of hockey. And sooner or later, that will catch up with him. I don't know that it's going to happen all that soon. But, getting into his mid-30s, yeah, it's possible that he slows down and just isn't as effective of a player toward the end of the contract as he has been, for the first couple of years here. The other big hurdle to get over is, we've been talking about all these no move clauses. Barclay Goodrow does not have a full no move clause, but he does have I believe the official term for it is a modified no move clause, which means essentially that he can block trades to 15 NHL teams. So that leaves the Rangers only 16 teams to work with. And as far as I know, that list of Barclay Goodrow's, the 15 teams that he can block a trade to, that is not public. I mean, I feel like by now, if that was public knowledge, I mean, somebody would have posted it, everybody would be discussing it on Twitter, and the whole 9 yards. So we don't know which 15 teams those are. And obviously that could impact, whatever happens. I don't think the Rangers would want to trade him in division. Are his in division, teams, are the in division teams for the Rangers, are they on Barclay Goodrow's no move clause? We don't know. So there's different X factors there. But we'll see, how that shakes out as far as, if the Rangers do trade him, where he ends up. Like I said, I don't think they'd want to trade him in division. You'd probably preferably want to trade him out of the conference. And I don't know, as far as Barclay Goodrow goes, which teams he doesn't want to go to and which teams are on his no move clause. But as far as what the Rangers could get in a return for Barclay Goodrow in a trade, I don't think they'd really get a whole lot because, again, the cap hit that we just mentioned and the fact that he has 4 years left on his deal, which we also just mentioned. So the team that were to acquire Barclay Goodrow, if the Rangers trade him, is making a commitment, both financially and in terms of longevity, because he's got another 4 years left on his deal. But you got to remember, because there's been people that have been saying like, oh, I don't think you can trade Barclay Goodrow. You'd have to attach a sweetener, this, that, and the other thing. We are living in a world where the Rangers traded Brett Howden for a 4th-round pick. They traded Ryan Reeves for a 5th-round pick. They even traded Vitaly Kravtsov for a 7th-round pick. So they got something even for Kravtsov. And I realize it's a little bit different because none of those players I just mentioned are making anywhere near the amount of money that Barclay Goodrow is. They are not signed for as long as Barclay Goodrow is. And in the case of both Howden and Kravtsov, they're quite a bit younger than Barclay Goodrow. So, those are factors to consider as well. But I just feel like the fact that Barclay Goodrow is just a far better player than any of the players I just mentioned, I do believe that there's got to be something. There's got to be one team out there. Of the 16 teams that Barclay Goodrow cannot block a trade to, there's got to be at least one of them that's willing to give the Rangers a 5th-round pick, a 6th-round pick, even a 7th-round pick, and not insist on the Rangers including a sweetener. You remember a couple of trades in recent Ranger history where they've had to deal somebody away and also attach a draft pick to said player in order for another team to basically just take that player off of their hands. We saw them do it this past offseason with Patrick Nemeth. The Rangers had to attach 2 second-round picks to him to get the Coyotes to take him away. I know the Rangers got Ty Emberson in that deal, and they got a draft pick themselves, but for the most part, Rangers had to give up draft picks to rid themselves of the Patrick Nemeth contract. And even Mark Stahl, beloved Ranger while he was here, toward the end of his Ranger career, not playing as well. They wanted to move on from him, and they traded him to Detroit along with a 2nd-round draft pick to basically get the Red Wings. They bribed them to just take Mark Stahl off of their hands. I don't think we're at that point with Barclay Goodrow. Barclay Goodrow is too good of a player. And again, you're not going to get like a big-time prospect or like a great draft pick in return for Barclay Goodrow because the fact that he is making a lot of money and is still signed for 4 years, that will come up in trade negotiations, I'm sure. But you're in a situation here where whichever team acquires Barclay Goodrow from the Rangers in a trade is basically playing the role that the Rangers played a couple of years ago. The Rangers acquired him from Tampa for just a 7th-round pick and obviously did an extension with Barclay Goodrow, got him under contract for a while. So the acquiring team would basically be taking on, a pretty significant salary for a pretty significant amount of years, but they would be doing so while realizing they don't have to give up much in the trade. I do think Barclay Goodrow could get the Rangers maybe like a 5th or 6th-round draft pick. I don't think it's going to be any higher than that. And it's not because he's not good or can't play hockey or he's not valuable. It's just that the acquiring team is taking on a pretty big commitment here. So they're not going to have to give up a whole lot. But there's got to be a team out there of the 16 that looks at Barclay Goodrow. Maybe they have some extra cap space laying around, and they say, this guy's a valuable player. We need more of this. We need more defensively responsible forwards. We want a veteran. We want a hard hitter, all those good things. I do think Barclay Goodrow can be traded by the Rangers to one of those teams without having to do anything ridiculous like attach a first-round draft pick to Barclay Goodrow. The return would be minimal for the Rangers, but I do think he could be moved. It would basically amount to just a glorified salary dump, if we're being honest here. But again, I don't want to see Barclay Goodrow leave. But as I've been saying throughout this this entire episode here, and even going back before that, it just feels inevitable at this point that they're going to have to do that to create some more cap space to do some other things that they need to do this offseason. But I figure we could pretty much call it there. Only other thing that I wanted to mention, I've been bringing this up every so often, Derek Stepan stories. I want to hear from you guys where you were, who you were with, how you reacted back in 2015 when Derek Stepan scored in overtime in Game 7 against the Washington Capitals to eliminate the Caps and send the Rangers to the Eastern Conference Final. Love hearing stories like this from you guys. And then in a future episode, I'm going to read all your responses, read all your responses, and just see how you guys all experience that wonderful moment in New York Ranger history. But yeah, pretty much we can call it there. That'll do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.